Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Pretty Suited Podcast where we discuss development through a cultural lens. I'm your host, Lauren A., and I'm only here today to give my opinion on a movie that has had my whole timeline in a chokehold for the past 2 weeks. And that is the Michael movie. Y'all, I could not wait to come back and tell y'all about what I think about this movie. Now, I know, I'm adding to the Michael fandom that's going on right now, but I will say this: I've been a fan. Okay, I'm not a new Michael fan. I didn't just discover Michael. I am a 90s baby, so I've known about Michael. I have family members who brought me up on Michael Jackson. Okay, from Off the Wall to Invincible, I have been a fan. Now, I said all that to say this Michael movie is something that has been teased for a while now, and we have kind of been trying to figure out how this is going to go because we've seen the Michael movies. There have been 50 limb Michael movies that have come out in the past 20, 30 years, okay? Starting from Moonwalk back in the early 90s, late 80s, okay? We've seen Michael's story, we've seen his past, we've seen his upbringing, but so I was just curious to see if this was going to show me something that I've never seen before. So I came into it with some set expectations, despite what I've read online about how certain family members didn't want to be involved. Janet, right? So since I've seen it, I kind of understand where she's coming from, but we're going to get into that. But I could understand how, if she didn't necessarily have an executive producer part, or if she didn't really have a hand in his story being told per se, then she kind of would want to back out of it. And it also depends on what the agenda or the motive was for his estate, because that has his own, it's basically his own company. And so judging by what they wanted to kind of be the outcome of this, maybe she didn't want any parts of it. We also understand that Rebe Jackson, the oldest sister, did not want to be a part of it. So with all that being said, I kind of still was curious because I just want to see what was covered. So I went on opening weekend, kind of in a secluded movie theater, just because I just wanted to kick my feet up and enjoy myself and kind of, do my own little weirdo dissection thing. And I would like to first say that while this movie has sparked a new, I'm talking about extreme boost in sales fandom for Michael Jackson and the greatness that he was as an artist, it left me with a lot of questions. And I would say that, not to give a full play-by-play breakdown on this, because I understand that everybody has seen every bit of a video talking about this. But what I would like to contribute to the conversation: when are we going to see the actual mind of Michael? And I know it's kind of hard, right? Because if you think about it, if somebody is not here, that's like a biography in an actual story in a book. It's hard to write a biography of someone through the lens of other people, because you may know the facade of them, you may know what the story is that they intended to put out, but you don't quite know the mind of the person who was doing it, or even just their intention. Intention is very hard for you to come up with without that person actually being there to express it. So what I will say is, I'm very curious, because we know about his genius, because we know about how articulate and how cynical he was of himself, right? And how much of a perfectionist he was when it comes to his craft. This man has studied from his childhood the likings of James Brown, Fred Astaire, Jackie Wilson, many people in his life who he felt like he could become, if not as big as them, but bigger than them. And he studied their moves. I'm talking down to the T. And then he cultivated that and made it his own. So to really digest the type of brain of a person with that much dedication, I'm very curious about. And we understand the relationship that he had with his father and how that was very tumultuous, how it was quote unquote abusive in a lot of cases, from the verbal abuse to the physical abuse, and even just how that cultivated in somewhat of a self hatred to where, and somewhat of a body dysmorphia, some would say, just based off of his, bouts with Villalago and just how he felt about himself from a young boy. We've seen that manifest into something. So, what is the psychology of that type of person who has so many layers on him that he came to be the greatest and biggest and most famous pop star of all time? How did we get here? We get bits and pieces, which we're not owed anything. Let's be very, very, very clear. We're not owed anything from this man. This man gave his life to this craft from 1968 to 2008. Okay? This man gave his whole life. All right? And so he doesn't owe us anything else. However, I just think for the person who is a music kind of junkie or who is just very interested in seeing the greats be great, I just would like to know kind of how his mind was able to cultivate and develop his skill set and translate that into great artistry at different moments of his life, right? Because off the wall, Micheal, afro, beautiful skin, great features, great smile. He seemed very confident, even from that stage to the Thriller stage, and going from the innovative videos to the groundbreaking video that Thriller was being put on, mainstream television when that wasn't being done, to like almost theater like. Actually, it was theater like. I think they actually displayed the video in theaters in the beginning. Like, it had show times. You could see it at 8, you could see it at 8:15, like that type of thing. It was like world premiere type of situation. So to see that be like, there were pop stars that were out years before him who wasn't even seeing this kind of stuff. I'm sorry. Actually, my bad. You know what? My bad. I totally skipped the Jackson 5. I totally skipped the Jacksons. We're talking about a 10-year-old boy, okay, that was a part of the Jackson 5, then the Jacksons, and then Off the Wall, and then Thriller, and then Bad, right? Now his features have completely changed. He's the biggest star of all time at this point, right? He's starting to detach himself from his brothers at this point. And he now gets, flooded with accusations and flooded with different things. So unfortunately, his career was never really settled at the moment where he should have been celebrating. It kind of hit a rock. It kind of hit a wall of just, this thing after this thing after this name after this name. And so despite all that, this guy actually ended up coming back and putting out one of my favorite R&B albums, which is Invincible. And Invincible, I would say in my adult years, I still play it to this day just because songs like Brick of Dawn are in heavy rotation for me. You Rock My World, Butterflies, like that type of album I would consider to be a classic just because of how you can play it back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, 2020s, and in the future. It's just one of those types of albums. I think that's true R&B, timeless music. But I personally think that this movie kind of fast forwarded a little too quickly. I share the same sentiments with like Kev on Stage, who said the same thing where, we know this stuff already. If you were a Micheal fan or if you, grew up in that era, you kind of knew this stuff already. However, this kind of introduced the eyes of those who did not know Micheal. So shout out to that. I'm pretty sure that's kind of what the intention was. However, for those who did and who did see this, and who's very familiar with who he is, we kind of knew all this stuff already. So it kind of goes back to my point of I just wanted to see something a little bit different. outside of just, the stardom and the fame and the, massive celebrity that he was. And I'm sure if you've seen it, there's going to be a part two. This for one was just an extreme cash cow that it just would be ridiculous for it not to be a part two. He has so much life to, remaining to talk about. And I hope that they do it a bit more justice, maybe even make it longer. People will sit for a 3-hour movie if they enjoying what they're seeing and they're having a good time and it's putting them through different emotions. Like, we would enjoy seeing that. So I'm hoping that they take that into consideration, take that feedback that we've been given, and make, the second half like a really good story of, his mental space at that time, because we can kind of, identify with maybe the person rising to the stardom and all the things. But what about when you were the biggest and then now you're kind of like falling from grace and then trying to pick yourself back up again, and then now you have, some mental and some addiction issues, like all the things. Let's talk about that kind of mental space, because that usually isn't seen as much. I think all the characters did a really good job portraying each person. I mean, you had Nia Long, you had Coleman Domingo, and you had Jafar, which is one of the brothers' sons. So you had some heavy hitters as far as the actors is concerned. I just wish that they were able to, utilize their acting chops a little bit more, with more depth and more, dimension in their characters. So, movie review aside, I really do feel like we are living in a time and an era that is very disappointing when it comes to role models. What is normally highlighted in today's society, especially in social media, is individuals who do things for clout, or who do things for sensational purposes, where they want to kind of get the biggest reaction out of something. And usually that comes with the lack of integrity, right? The more wow you try to seek, the more lack of integrity you actually display. I don't know why that's correlated, but it is. And unfortunately, what happens is when you see that on a pedestal, you actually attract more people to do the same thing to get the same result. Because nobody's saying that this type of clout chasing personality isn't lucrative. Nobody is saying that, because unfortunately it is in today's society. Because the more clicks, the more, attention, you still get paid for that type of thing. However, what we are seeing now is that instead of younger generations wanting to grow up and be engineers and wanting to grow up and be lawyers and microbiologists and marine biologists and anthropologists and engineers and all the things, we're seeing the number one career is some sort of content creation. Now, while that may be a little contradicting, because here I am creating content, but I've also developed a career and cultivated time and attention into a skill set that I utilize, to support my life, right? And to also help me learn and develop and grow. And so, and I'm not saying you can't do that with content creation, because that's these people's whole career. However, when we don't necessarily see the options out there, then our view is very limited. And so I said all that to say, I think we're coming to an era where we are not going to see people lock in. It was this video that I've seen recently where a woman said that the reason why we're so infatuated with Michael Jackson was because that was probably the last biggest star we've ever seen, right? And we know Beyonce has come from that. We've known Lady Gaga and several other massive celebrities who may be, in the same atmosphere, but not necessarily have reached Michael Jackson level. However, all of those people who have stemmed from him since then, who were in that atmosphere, they all have one thing in common. They locked in. And I'm not talking about just a simple lock in where, I studied a few hours and I took a few courses and things like that. Oh, I'm talking about pure D obsessive lock in. And I'm not saying that's everybody's ministry, right? I'm not saying that at all, because that's not my ministry to be as, you know, big of a celebrity as Michael Jackson. That's not my ministry. However, what I would say that is a very fascinating thing to witness is somebody who, out of the 8 billion people on this planet, was chosen and cultivated a talent to be the greatest and biggest artist of all time. Even if it comes down to video games, even if it comes down to architecture or new invention, whatever it is, I don't necessarily think, because of how we're growing in a society that's a little bit more apathetic to like the future. We don't even know if there's a new virus coming out tomorrow. Like, we're just kind of like, gas is $8 a gallon. So it's just like, we're a little bit more pessimistic in what we're able to do or what the future may bring. And so I think that's breeding a society of people that's not willing to put in that much effort into anything. I don't care if it's your job. I don't care if it is driving. I don't care if it is sports. I don't care if it is whatever it is. I don't think people are as excited to go above and beyond as they were before. Why? Because we saw in the past that the extra work and the extra effort and the extra time and dedication brought you results that made you extraordinary. Versus these days, it's the pool is a little bit more flooded with mediocrity, and then that ends up breeding fame and popularity with little effort. And then now we're seeing, well, why do I need to go above and beyond? Why do I need to be extraordinary? When that is getting time and attention and financial, gain. But here I am trying to be one in a million, but that's not getting me anywhere. Then of course you're going to have more people leaning towards the former. And so what that does is place us in a society of complacency. And that's a dangerous society to be in. Because if nobody's trying, if nobody's really going above and beyond for each other, for themselves, for their dreams, now you're left with a place of people who are easily manipulated, lackadaisical. And honestly, I think that's kind of sad. So when we see somebody who put their all into what they did, despite the negativity that was against them, and still triumphed in the end to be the greatest, I think that's a story we can all get behind. And it's unfortunate that I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. And I'm laughing, but it's not that funny, because honestly, that is something that we would need to witness. I think that would be something that would change the trajectory of things, because people need hope. Humans need something that, they can aspire to, that brings them, peace, to know that everything is going to be okay. I really want to say shout out to those who don't take what they do and what their dreams are for granted, and that is willing to kind of go that extra step and go the extra mile to be great at what they do. I think that is something that will always stand the test of time. You will always outperform and outlast kind of the microwave individual who is only in for short-term gain. But I do feel like we need to make sure that we are promoting that kind of mentality. We need to make sure that we're promoting the individual to be great, because we're only here one time, right? And so we need to be filled in a world with great lawyers and great architects and great technicians and great plumbers. Like, we need people to be great at what they do. So I challenge, you guys to kind of rethink Michael's story from a different perspective, not to just fawn over how much of a great performer he was or innovator he was, but really take the time to pick apart and understand what it takes to get to that level. Because we all can take something from that experience, the good, hopefully, and apply it to our own lives, so that way we aren't just living in mediocrity. That's just a thought. Now, do we need a Joe Jackson to get us in shape? Maybe not. But be your own Joe Jackson, right? Expect high standards of yourself. expect that you are capable. One thing Joe Jackson didn't do is say that Mike wasn't able. So despite his harsh, right, and unexcusable methods, one thing he never said to any of his boys was that they weren't capable. And so for you to be that to yourself, to say, I'm able, I'm capable, and I'm willing to go above and beyond for myself and for my dreams, I think that's a positive. So why not? But anyways, until next time, you cannot manifest the life you feel like you don't deserve. So create the life that you want and look to the sky for grace. Bye-bye.
For all that life has in store.